Recording, and I promised to record this. So I don't know what made me remember that, but pardon me. Her award-winning work appears in many journals, including the online New Verse News and Shrew. Her collections, Thieves in the Family, NYQ Books, and two chapbooks, Amore on Hope Street, which is the Finishing Line Press, and Two Naked Feet, Poets Wear Prada is the publisher there. She is the New York culture editor for the Jerusalem Post and contributes to USA Today, Travel Market Report, and the bilingual La Voce di New York. So welcome, Maria. Thank you so very much for joining us and for being willing to be part of this conversation. So I thought tonight we would just begin by remembering the morning. It's dark now, but this morning, as the light came up, it was a beautiful foggy day. And fog has a special place, as we'll see a little bit further down in the conversation tonight. There are some poems that talk about fog, and so I felt as though fog was a particular blessing for today. I know Maria was also thinking about fog this morning.
Yeah, I was thinking more of laps of gray on top of gray on top of gray, which I found kind of enchanting, actually.
I can look through a sliver at my studio across the river and almost see Richard's building. And this morning, I was tempted to call him, but it was too early, and say, your building is disappearing into the fog. So I don't know if you got a chance to walk around in that fog, Richard. But
I'm so happy that you're speaking about fog. It's one of my favorite phenomena. And I think it fits in, Karen and Maria, very beautifully into what we're going to be thinking about. The shape of fog. If you can think of fog as a form of calligraphy, as it moves, as it shapes itself over time, as we're either inside it or as part of it or watching it. And it always occurs to me that when we experience fog, we experience a form of writing, a form of light, which in fact is shaping itself right in front of us. And it can be argued, of course, that it is mostly moisture, but isn't light in some ways also moisture? I only raise that as a question, as a possible way of looking at the substance of light itself. It's not purely something that is broadcast as light, but it brings out all of the various aspects of things that are around us. And one of the things that I think, Karen, you were very interested in us thinking about was this relationship between the image and the word, and
yes,
where those two interconnect. And I think there's a deep connection to them. And because of my work with children, I see that happening all the time, where children, when they first begin to draw, to me, some of that early drawing, those wonderful aspects of drawing that happen very quickly and spontaneously, are the child's way of speaking. It's a way of creating qualities of movement, qualities of thoughts that are on the paper. And I think it goes back right to, I see Sabra still has her flower there. If I can just make a kind of notation on Sabra's flower, is that there we see calligraphy in its prime, which is the flower shaping and moving, the coloration and everything else. That to me is, again, a form of calligraphy. Calligraphy, I think, on that level, is one of our earliest, most primary ways of expressing ourselves, and certainly on the human evolution of things. So that if we go back as far as we can go, you know, we see all kinds of wonderful examples of not only the calligraphy that is nature, um, but the calligraphy of that is the child imitating what it sees. And I have some, again, I don't know if any of this is going to show, but I did bring a few little images here. Of course, I have to bend over to show them to you. Um,
Richard, before we go forward with those images, I
Yeah.
thought what might be helpful for our audience as well is to just kind of if I might share where this work started, because the beginning of this body of work is also really a kind of point where I became very aware of how deeply intertwined the poetic language is with the visual language.
Yes.
And so I just want to take a step backward and just talk about two things that formed and inspired this body of work.
Good.
Uh, One is a visual phenomenon, and the other is a poem. And so what I'm going to do just very quickly, and then we are going to look at the images you pulled up. I'm going to share my screen and just share these sort of core beginnings with all of you. And then we can do a little more exploration of what is more of the interconnection between visual language and verbal language. And so what we see here on the screen is a beautiful, modest 12-inch square painting that I acquired a couple of years ago. It's done by a woman whose name is Gay Patterson. Gay passed away in 2018, and I was very, very lucky through my good friend to acquire one of her paintings. So I live with it in my house. It sits directly across from where I work. I can see it all day long when I'm at home. And it changes phenomenally and dramatically as the day's light courses through our building and affects the painting surface. From anywhere in the room, if there's a candle on or several candles burning, it picks up that quality of light and is a beautiful, beautiful dynamic piece. And so this painting really inspired me. She left a note on her work table, and this was the last piece of writing that her friends found after she passed away. And the last sentence of the note says, "Display and embody a profound awareness of the power of light," which indeed her work absolutely does. And so I think that is a core place. That is what inspired me to write the grant that partially funded this production of work. And then the other cornerstone in this body of work is a poem. Now, I'm not sure if I have the temerity to read this poem to you. Poetry reading for me is generally a private reading experience. I do enjoy listening to people read poems. Maria, especially, you have a beautiful cadence when you read. You have a sense of drama and subtlety when you read, and so a poem comes alive in the way that you read it. I'm not sure I could come up to that level of having the proper breaks and breathing and rhythm in the poem. So I'm sure as I'm nattering along, you have all just about finished reading this poem. This is a Rilke poem called What You Cannot Hold. And the thing that was very important for me as a visual artist, it's not just what the poem is talking about. It's a very abstract idea that there are things we cannot hold. Talks about the breath, talks about a passage of time. But then at the end, he says, you cannot bring these things along. He says, give yourselves to the air, to what you cannot hold. And the very first time I read that poem, I remember I was a puddle of goosebumps upon reading that ending. I can't explain that exactly, but it's what happens to me when I read poetry that enters fully into me. It transforms things with me. It becomes a smear of inspiration. There are, except for the words of the poem, the things that I am sensing internally um, are generally outside of verbal language. Um, and that's very true when I'm making artwork. Um, Only the visual language is present. And so this is a painting that came near the end of the suite of work that's in this show. It's called Fog Light, Remembering Gay. And it is a painting that was one of those gift paintings, happened quite quickly, but I recognized immediately that what was in it was this quality that's in the Rilke poem. It's about giving yourself over to the air, giving yourself to breath, um, giving yourself up to those things that we cannot hold, that we can't hold on to. And so these are the kinds of things that have uh, bookended this suite of work. And I'm going to just stop sharing now. And we can sort of pick up the conversation from where you were talking in a very, very beautiful way, Richard, about the calligraphy that is surrounding us, even in fog. That light itself is a sense, has a sense of calligraphy.
Just going back to the Rilke poem, the very last line, Karen, where it says, give yourself to the air, to what you cannot hold. What a fascinating and beautiful line. Um, and the idea that each of us, as part of our inner world, that we can in fact reach through our imagination the invisible and what the invisible means to us. Excuse me. And I think it's one of the great motivating factors of the creating of art, creating of expression, is the invisible. And I think what you've been able to do with your attention to light is bring out those inner qualities of light of what we can't see, but we can actually see in another way, if you understand what I'm saying. That there's, I think we have both two sets of eyes. We have these eyes that go that way, and we have the inward eyes, which is our imagination, which can perform amazing acts of seeing and viewing. And I think going back to my earlier comment about calligraphy is that I think children in particular, all of us once when we were children, experienced the air, experienced light in ways that we forget as we get older. And one of the things that I think we do resonate with when we're in the presence of air or presence of light is the volume of these qualities, the volume of these phenomena. And we want to be the air. We want to get inside the air. We want to get inside the light. And it's one of the marvels, I think, of the child's imagination to be able to make that leap so that I can come into a room, you know, as I've sometimes done at PS 99, and I can bring this wonderful globe of light with me. And I can say to any group of children, whether they're kindergarten children or fifth graders, I will just simply say to them, you know, I have a little piece of light today with you. And of course, there's always going to be a child who says, no, Richard, this is a marble. No, I say, no, it's a piece of light. And one of the marvels of the child's imagination is that once we agree that we can go the route of the imagination, I will then probably put the light down just for a second, and I'll say, won't you just for a minute take your hands and let the light come into your hands like this, and then just look at the light as quietly as you can inside and see what you see inside the light. Now, that to me is one of the first acts of imagining something that maybe can't be seen, but might be felt. And feeling is as much a way of seeing as seeing is seeing, if you understand what I'm saying on that level. And I think that's where children have that marvelous kinetic ability to move the boundaries. I suspect our earliest ancestors, when they discovered the sense of creating a way of talking about the unknown, that part which Rilke speaks about here, give yourselves to the air, to what you cannot hope, that they were performing an act of trying to figure out, how can I take the invisible, make it visible, and make life from it? Um, and you know, there's this wonderful, excuse me, I don't have the slides for this, but um, there's this wonderful Haida myth in the Indians, um, about Raven. I don't know, can everybody see that a little bit? Sorry for my lack of sophistication. That's Raven there. And Raven is holding light. That's what he did. He stole the light, and the world was in darkness. And the way light came into the world is that Raven stole it, and it was in a small little box somewhere. And he found the box, he opened it up, and slowly he gave little bits of light to the world. And then the world came to be. So it was the process, mythically speaking, of taking the invisible, putting it in a box. Raven found it, opened it up, and as a gesture to the world, to the creation of the world, gave it to the rest of us. So I think that what you've done with your art is that you've combined both the image of the word and the image of the gesture of art itself, and you've brought them together. And in a way, it's very much the way I would suspect children begin to see the world, that they have this aptitude of looking at things both inwardly, as I say, and outwardly. It's not simply just the physical sense of the eye, but it's the internal sense of the eye exploring the phenomena of feeling, of what it is I feel when I'm in that fog or in that air or in that wind or in that beam of light. Um, and it basically is every child on that sense, and every one of us, and you now have recapitulated that, have created an act of creation. You've made light come alive. And by making it come alive, you've opened that question of, where do we begin to see light in a different way? How do we look at it so that it's not just something that's portrayed on the canvas, but in fact invites us to enter into the very light that you've created, which I think is what art in its best ways invites us to do. We become the very phenomena that you're speaking of.
Thank you. Maria, you and I have talked about the idea of seeing in the dark and also seeing in the light. And there's kind of a oppositional or a continuum there, where light is a phenomenal presence.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Richard. I really enjoyed listening to you. I have also come into like different feelings about light because my stepson is blind and recently blind. And so through him, I have to say that he feels light in a very different way than a sighted person would, right? And I also found this interesting quote from Patti Smith that I just wanted to share, and it's a little bit about light. I understand that what matters is the work, the string of words propelled by God becoming a poem, the weave of color and graphite scrawled upon the sheet that magnifies this motion. To achieve within the work perfect balance of faith and execution, from this state of mind comes a light, a life charged. And I kind of enjoyed that because she's equating light with an energy, not necessarily something that a sighted person would see. And I there's just a couple of lines I had from a piece about my stepson. We were out, we were away from where he lives, and the weather was really good and he hardly ever went out. And he was anxious to go back out into the, out of the restaurant into the sun. And he said, I need to feel the weather, to feel the sun. It'll make my scar disappear into my skin better. And he also has these very strong feelings about color, that as organized as he has become because of the blindness, he can touch his shirts and say, each color gives me a different energy. And he's almost always correct. It's just kind of a mystifying feeling. And I mean, fortunately, he's very articulate, so he can, do that. But he also has this childlike quality because he's mentally ill. And he can read maybe Hawking's book about black holes and so on. And he gathers some information from this. And then he'll say to you, I'll say, well, what do you have in your backpack? I have all 9 planets. I carry them wherever I go because they have energy and they give me energy. And it's just like, there's all this crossover and so I don't know how comprehensive that sounds. These are just pieces of things about light in a different, from a different, a different and challenging position in the world from someone who's in the dark. But he remembers things in very detailed ways and says, I'm glad I had my sight to see the beach at Luquillo in Puerto Rico. I remember it perfectly. And I wonder, as a blind person, does his memory have snapshots? Does he see snapshots as a blind person? Or is it purely a mental exercise that he's able to pull off, which keeps him grounded as to who he is before the blindness? Anyway, it's just going off into this, but it's interesting to me because it links up with words, and the emotions are very, very tied with words. And it's very real for him. So it's been kind of an interesting experience for me. But I was telling Karen also that as I kept reading some of Mary Oliver, I started thinking about writers who have a lack of light, like Edgar Allan Poe. And her analysis, Mary Oliver's analysis of that, is that his life was so uncertain that he kept it in the dark, that the light would have been more frightening, but also the light is connected with certainty and the dark is not. And, he's got all these terrors and plagues and tortures and everything, but a normal life includes occasional black moods, whereas he found some weird safety in darkness. And I found this fascinating as I was flipping through all kinds of things I was reading. And there's a quote, and though nothing in that dark kingdom is provable, neither can its non-existence be proved. So that was my embracing Edgar Allan Poe in all his dark.
There's also something about, I think that's deliciously relevant to this conversation when we talk about certainty. And the Polish poet Miłosz has talked about this, that, words have certainty. Words have a kind of concrete meaning where we think we know what we are talking about when we're using them. And Miosh talks about how it was such a struggle in writing poetry to ever get the words to really say something, to say it clearly, to say it succinctly. And, you know, when you read some of his poetry, I think to myself after I read that passage where he talks about how difficult it is to nail down the language, to get it to speak for him. I thought, well, it's perfectly clear. It's right there. And, you know, we walk around in these perfect bubbles of certainty with verbal language. And I think one of the things that is terribly important to me about poetry is that it sort of catapults the certainty of language out of its own certainty. And so that a phrase like that Rilke phrase really kind of jolts you. It's like, well, okay, well, we were talking about, what were we talking about? We were talking about breathing, and we were talking about, you know, breathing going in and out. And we were talking about, you know, the bow that shoots the arrow. That's all pretty certain stuff. And then he talks about fear and weight. And then all of a sudden, he's talking about letting all of that stuff go and giving up what you can't hold. And I think what he's talking about is letting go of certainty and letting our imaginations really come into an uncertain place, but not bringing all the baggage that we usually carry around with about uncertainty, which is a little bit what Poe is talking about.
Right.
That we're afraid of it. We're afraid of it because we don't know what it is. We don't know what it means. It's uncertain. And I think maybe Rilke, you know, maybe Rilke wants us to go there. Let's just go to that imaginative place because there's nothing to fear in there. As our outside eyes turn to the inside, as you so correctly describe, Richard, I think there are all kinds of discoveries to be made. You know, places between phenomenon that are rich and ready for us to uncover and discover. So,
Well, Karen, Maria, going back to what you were saying about this child who actually made things come alive, of things that he couldn't see, couldn't experience, and you were, Karen, talking about languages having the way we speak having a certain certainty to them, as opposed to things that are not certain. And I want to go back again to some earlier thoughts about that. You know, in the Inuit world, Eskimo world, the word for breath and poetry are the same, and the word is Anerka. And so as we breathe, and as we write poetry, we're breathing. And that there's no substitute, there's no difference between the two. The one word treats both. And there's a wonderful.
that's what I call certain.
Yes, but it's certainty of the uncertainty that the word that I speak is poetry, and the words that I imagine or create, or the images that I create, are also a way of breathing and of poetry at the same time. So there's no separation between the two. So there is a lovely Eskimo poem, Inuit poem, and it's called Magic Song for Him Who Wishes to Live. And it's very short. Day arises from its sleep. Day wakes up with the dawning light. Also, you must arise. Also, you must awake together with the day which comes. So day and breathing and poetry and sunlight are all intermixed, and without one or the other, we're not alive. And
And they're all conscious.
And they're all conscious, exactly. And there's this beautiful print by, I don't know if you can see this, by Unark. I'm going to hold it up. There it is. Unark is a Inuit artist. Um, and it also has that beautiful sense of breath and life coming alive by floating on the air itself, um, dancing in the air. Uh, so I think, you see, going back to what I kind of was originally working with, is that what originates in our childhoods is this ability to do the very things that we think as adults we can't do anymore, but the child has that capacity. And that's, if I can call it that, the genius of childhood. It's the ability to move within and around areas of consciousness, of being both seeing this way outwardly and seeing inwardly, and not doubting it, even though there might be a momentary doubt that, this is a ball of light. But when I tell everybody, I'd like you to make a little book of light, and I fold it like that, just like that, and I say to everybody, just take a little speck of light like this and put it in the book like that, and you can take this home with you. And anytime you want to look at your light that you've just captured, it's right inside here. And of course, they might try this with the children. The children say, oh, I don't see any light inside. But then the children who have been actually working with Karen and I when we were working at BS9, they will say, no, no, no. Richard said, and Karen said, we can put the light inside here and close it like this. So what I'm trying to kind of convey here is that this unknown, Karen, that you're speaking about, this area that we can't get to sometimes, is available in the way the child's mind develops. It works both ways towards the middle. And I think that's part of the marvel of being a person who's involved in the creation of art on any level, is that we're always trying to reach maybe that moment of childhood where we have that marvelous kind of interplay between this and that. And it goes back to the word play, of course. Play is, again, part of the way in which that part of the mind continues to develop. And if we don't lose that, then we're in the presence again of that unknown, but playing with it, creating out of it, thinking through it and with it. So that even though we can't hold it, we can hold it, if you know what I'm saying. We hold it here, and the unknown is still a beautiful presence, but it keeps beckoning, it keeps beckoning. And as it beckons, it opens up vistas of possibilities. And I think with your art, you've definitely tried to move towards that vista of what we can't necessarily see, but it's there.
Thank you. Yeah, I keep thinking about this, this quality of how malleable things are. Um, I think one of the qualities of becoming an adult is that things sort of get nailed into place. They get, the world functions in a certain way. We enter some kind of a groove where we're functioning, we're doing what work we've chosen to do. We're keeping ourselves fed. We've got chores we've got to do. We've got things we've got to take care of. And we don't necessarily have a lot of time to be daydreaming or time to be unfocused. And so the world becomes less malleable. And I think for children, the world is a magically malleable place. Things are continuously shifting. They are continuously changing and becoming or manifesting different qualities that the person can perceive. And I think that in-between place of malleability is kind of, if we can think about the two language systems, the poetic language on the one hand and the visual language on the other hand, if we can think of them as geographies, that maybe there is a place where the geographies come together, they begin to move together. and that is a very dynamic, malleable place where words can suggest something and visual form can suggest something as well, and that they can have a influence on each other. And I think that when I make a painting that's a good painting, that I feel has sort of a voice of its own, that's what's happening in the painting. Whatever title I assign to it sort of points a direction for a viewer to go into, maybe in a sensual way, or maybe in an idea way. And the form itself comes into that middle ground between verbal language and between the formal visual language, and makes a malleable place where they're mixing together. But of course, that's all dependent upon someone perceiving the thing and having some sort of an extended perceptual conversation with it.
Mhm. Can I ask you a question, Karen? You had
Yes.
mentioned in your email this morning about the fog, going back to the fog, that when you were young and your parents, the first thing they did in the morning was talk about the weather. Am I right?
Mhm.
And
Yes.
obviously that was a very important moment to you. Why was it so important to you? What was it about that piece of memory lingers with you, of hearing your parents talking, discussing the weather? What was that about?
Well,
We had this conversation about this today, yeah.
anytime that I have had conversations with my parents, they have always started with a discussion of the weather. And once I moved to New York, I'm originally from the Midwest, as some of you know. But once I left the Midwest and came to New York, I thought, well, that'll be the end of weather conversations. Nobody talks about the weather. Um, and it was always a delight to talk to people from my hometown or go home again and pick up a conversation and first thing talking about the weather. And I thought about it for a long time, and I thought, why do people talk about the weather so incessantly? It's just weather is weather. I mean, I love weather. The more vigorous, the better. But as I reflected on it, I realized that it's actually a philosophical discussion. It's a metaphysical discussion that people are having when they're talking with each other about weather, because the weather is something we're subject to. We cannot control the weather. We can't change it. We can complain about it up and back and yawn and far, but we can't do anything about the weather except build the fire higher if it's cold outside, or open a window if it's hot, and get into a dry place if it's wet. And so I think the weather presents us with the true reality of our nature, which is it's a constant roil of change. It's a constant thing that, we live within this organism of the earth. We're a part of it, and we can't control any of it. And I think discussing the weather is a way of acknowledging that. It's a way of saying, well, there's that stuff going on outside, and we can't affect it at all, but we can witness it.
Also, yeah, I think we were saying today that it's also a point of union.
Exactly.
And what comes next is another plane, maybe another plane to the relationship beyond the weather. But the weather being such a safe and perfect place, in the sense, like you're saying, it's you're relating to the earth, you're relating to the environment. And it's a safe place because, as you said, you can't change it. So it's a safe point of which, you can discuss it, you can get energy from it, you can maybe not get energy from it, but you're all in the same place. And it's this one thing that holds you together. I think, it's kind of a point of union. So I think it's a safe area from which to start any conversation.
Well, I want to pick up Maria and Karen, what both were saying, which is wonderful. But Karen, I'm going to push you a little further here. Can you remember the sensation of your parents talking about the weather? Not the facts of it, but the sensation of it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I
Um,
do.
because I have a sense that that memory of the weather has a lot to do with you as an artist, has a lot to do with a quality of feeling, perhaps, that resonates with you as you listen to your parents talking about, oh, today it's going to snow or rain, or it's windy, or it's hot, or it's cold, that had something to do about the life of things that perhaps are older than we are, if you understand what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Older than human life, I'm talking about. A phenomena, pure phenomena. Am I right? Can you remember any of those sensations?
Is it like a sense of harmony?
Sense of harmony, yes, that's another way of putting it, surely.
I
Um,
think, I think it's a sense of that when they were speaking about the weather, um, I don't ever recall my parents complaining about the weather. They knew better than to complain about the weather. Um, but I do recall a sense of often having a quality of awe about
mhm,
the weather.
mhm,
And that built into that is this sense of appreciation for the weather.
mhm.
Um, we had some terrific, vigorous weather out there in Wisconsin. Um, and, you know, it affected our lives incredibly. But I think that is the quality that's left over. I can't attest to the fact that I actually have a memory of that.
Yes.
But I suspect that is what undergirds
Mm.
those weather conversations that I picked up as a very young person.
How old were you? How old were you?
Um, I do have a memory of going out with my father on a very, very cold day. It was below zero. And I always asked to go. And often my mother would say, no, you're too little, which I hated when she said that. But this one time she let me go. And it was taking the cow manure out of the barn and taking it out into the field and dumping it off into the field, which they would then in the springtime distribute across the field as fertilizer. So it was a cold ride on the back of the stone boat with my dad. And when I came back, I remember my fingers were frostbit. I had, you know, very thick gloves on. I don't remember any words on that conversation, on that trip, but I remember all of the sounds of the horses pulling the stone boat and the thing creaking and squeaking over the snow and the sound of my father unloading the manure. Um, you know, that's a memory that's lodged in there that is along the same lines of being out in the natural world and being with a person that understood it as a condition that was a blessing in all ways, shapes, and forms. And I think both of my parents felt that way about the natural world and about the things in it. And so that is, you know, I think that's where all of this comes from.
Yeah.
Were they particularly spiritual or observant religiously?
Yes, they were.
Yeah,
They
because I think that's where the awe comes from also.
were.
Yeah.
My father actually had his heart set on sending me to the convent, but I didn't cooperate.
Oh, my mother had that too. I didn't do so well in that area either.
Karen, if I can just pick up a little further on what you were saying, because I think it has all to do with your intimacy with light, if I can put it that way, is that those moments when your father took you outside and it was cold and all of the qualities that you were talking about. Um, I suspect you were experiencing the world in its wholeness, if I can say it that way. You were experiencing the weather, but you were experiencing yourself in the weather. You were
Mhm.
experiencing maybe kind of an awakening to the sense of light that was happening in that weather and the drama that was going on. The sky was getting darker, or it began to snow, or light was changing all around you. But you didn't have the words necessarily to talk about it, but you had the inner life to experience it. In other words, the sensation of it, the feeling of it,
Mhm.
and it's haunted you. And I don't mean to be a therapist on this level with that. I just mean to think in terms of your 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 devotion, and so to speak, to finding that part of ourselves through what the light is saying. You know, what is it saying? And some people will say, well, the light doesn't speak, but it does, doesn't it? For you, it spoke.
Yes,
And you know what I'm trying to say? So
I do.
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, from the time when I was a very little girl, um, I have always loved the moon. We all love the moon. I
Yeah.
mean, who doesn't like the moon? The moon is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But from the time when I was a very little person, even up until now, I always thought the moon was watching me,
Yes.
that the moon was talking to me, not in word language, but if I looked at the moon was definitely looking at me. And I can remember, you know, snippets of things being in a car and riding down the highway on a moonlit night in the back of the, and looking out the window and watching the moon and like, moon sees me, moon's watching me. But just having that, you know, that sense of it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. The sun sees me, I see the sun. That's, you know, something that we have worked with students many, many times, talking about it as a two-way street.
Yeah.
And I think that that is, has absolute truth in it. So,
Well, there is that little poem, I See the Moon and the Moon Sees Me. I mean, we were surrounded by a lot of poetry actually when we grew up in the 50s and the 60s, actually. I'm not sure how much of that continues. But the whole idea of it's almost like you've been imprinted with this sense, you know, from that the conversations that your parents had. It's almost like an imprint and an impression that seeps in. And I found an interesting, very short quote from Joy Harjo, who's the poet laureate of the US. I think she was twice. And she's a musician and she writes songs and she's a Native American. She says, there's things that my poetry and music know that I don't know. It's a teaching thing. And I think instead of music, you could say art, that somehow you can't actually concretely follow those steps, but they inform each other, you know, in sort of like that fog, you know, that melds, that those gray areas that, you know, sort of overlap each other. And I think that if you're creating and you're in touch with who you are, you know, the you before the world kind of got involved with you, you have these channels open where these things can inform each other. And I think that happens with your work a lot because you are so tied to the two, the words and the
mhm.
impressions of the light, that how it occupies space
Mhm.
in your work.
Yeah.
Really.
Thank you.
I,
Um,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to pick up, uh, Maria, just a little bit on what you were saying about the moon sees me and I see the moon. Um, you know, my uncle, who's no longer alive, but my uncle would sometimes come to dinner, my parents' house, and I was very little, and he would always want to say something to me And he'd come up with his fist like that, and he said, and he'd suddenly open it, and he said, "Where did the light go?" And I said, "Do it again." And he said, "Where did the light go?" And I would remember tapping the table and saying, "I know where it went," but he didn't want to hear it because that wasn't the point. The point was to keep me on my toes, right? So I think what you've touched upon is that question, not only what light is, but what's behind it, what's inside it, where does it go? What's the unanswered question of light itself, right? It's a haunting question and a beautiful question, and one which we would never hopefully forget, because scientifically yes, we can figure out what light might be, but the experience of that light is a whole other question. And that's the marvel of taking something as elemental as light itself and letting yourself simply say, what is it? But more so, what's the inward life of light itself? Um, and so where poetry comes in is that I think the connection between the word and the visual image is intertwined constantly. Words are images. And when you write a word on a page, which we don't often do anymore, but when you write with your hand on a page, you are in a sense creating an image, which happens to be, a single letter of a word. And then when all those letters come together to make a word, as sometimes children will often say, "I said that," or "I wrote that," the surprise that children have when they're young and they discover that I can make that word stick down on a page, right? It's an amazing phenomena. Unfortunately, with the computer, we don't have that same kind of visceral quality, sensory quality of our hand actually sketching the word onto a piece of paper. But anyway, I think the exploration that art is able to do and that you've been able to do is to reach beyond obviously the factual, but get deeply into the sensation again. Your parents talking about weather, and you as a child absorbing all these words: snow, rain, clouds. It's going to be cloudy today, and it's not going to be, the light might not be so good, or whatever they were saying. All these words were kind of coming alive in your thoughts, and you've never forgotten them. And you've never forgotten that sensation. So to recapitulate it through your work is a marvelous kind of journey to take on that level.
There's a quote actually that Maya Angelou uses, and I think you can annotate it a little bit. I believe that every word is a thing. It goes into everything, and finally into my body. And I think what the mind does not remember, the body always remembers, and helps you to execute that integrity between word and vision.
Yes, absolutely.
That's beautiful. Well, I think that is a perfect place to open up our conversation to everyone else that's in our Zoom room this evening. If you have a comment or a question, we would love to, have you speak it out. You can also put it into the chat if you don't want to turn your microphone on, and I'll do the best to relay what's in chat to the rest of everyone that's here. I would ask you, just as a simple housekeeping task, that when you unmute yourself, please introduce yourself, and just, if you wish, tell us what community you are arriving from, or you don't have to. Yeah, what, I'm curious, what are people thinking? Go ahead, Pearl.
Hiya, Karen. What a lovely, wonderful conversation. And I have to say, this has been special on so many levels. First of all, Richard Lewis is someone who was spoken about so much when I was working at Studio in the school.
Oh.
And so to finally hear you and see you is really quite a treat.
Oh, thank you, Pearl.
So I was like, oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
And I just had to say that you were part of my life in a very rich way for many years.
Wow, I appreciate that.
And I need to also address something that Maria said about her nephew who now has blindness. And I worked with people, with children and adults who were blind and visually impaired. I worked with artists who were blind and visually impaired. And I also know about people that have hypersensitivities that would permit things like being able to feel color.
Mhm.
So, and I also know on a very personal level about UV light in a way that most people never will experience. So what I can tell you about Maria, about your nephew that feels the color of his clothes, is that is a very real sensation that can happen. I know someone that has that. People that have Sjögren's syndrome, that heightens their senses so that some fragrances will become painful and something to be avoided. In some cases, even light becomes overwhelming and something to be avoided. And within that is also these other hypersensitivities that happen where you can actually feel color. And so that's a real thing that your nephew has. I don't know that he has necessarily Sjögren's syndrome, but some part of him that awareness has been heightened. He falls into the area of what's called a hypersensitivity.
Yeah, I call him hypervibratory.
Yeah.
He's my stepson, actually. I brought him up since.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I
Yeah,
didn't.
that doesn't matter. But yeah, he's hypervibratory. He just has this ultra sensitivity. And 9 times out of 10, he's absolutely right about the color.
Yep. So he has that, and it's a real thing. And it's like, and most people would say, "Oh, that's crazy. How can you feel the color red? How can you feel the color blue by touch?"
Yeah.
But it's a real thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because he is mentally ill. So I know he does have delusions, but that's not one of them.
Mhm.
That one's on the money.
And then you brought up the question of what is he seeing as what is his mind seeing as a blind person? And I've had so many wonderful, interesting, and amazing experiences with artists who are blind. I mean, people that could paint what's in their head, but they can't see it on the paper. And a person who, especially someone who was at one point had sight, that is all still there. It's all still there. It has, in some ways, it doesn't have much to do with losing sight. So, and the other thing about light is I became photosensitive as a result of a reaction from a drug. And I had to live in the black. I had to live in darkness. And I was so hypersensitive to light that I could feel dawn coming inside my bedroom. I could feel it starting without ever seeing it.
So
Pitch
you
black.
feel it in your body.
Yep, you could feel it in your body. You could be so incredibly hypersensitive to things. Our immune system and our sensitivities and nervous system, they are just remarkable in terms of what but that's so, I just wanted to fill in some of those areas. And about Karen's work, which I am such a big fan of, I think the word sensuous just is so right on for your work. Oh my God. That word, Karen, I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's it. And to hear you talk about weather, which you know I am a big fan of as well, was fabulous on so many levels. So I think I am talked out.
Thanks,
Thank you, Karen, for creating this evening and creating your fabulous work.
Thank you. There's a wonderful question that Zebra has put into chat, and
Yeah.
she asks, light is the source of color. What is the source of light? So that's another conundrum that we can look at this
Well,
way.
it's ultraviolet. It's the rays, the ultraviolet rays. That's what the light is. It's composed up of this entire spectrum. And my doctor would tell me about how much of the spectrum was a problem to me, that's a very unusual conversation to have with a doctor about the UV spectrum in terms of how it physically affects me. Thank God I'm not in that place anymore, but it was a very scary place to be.
And one of the attendees tonight has as a background screen behind her the aurora
Yeah.
borealis.
The Northern Lights.
Yeah.
If you pin it, you feel like you're actually there. I did pin it because I had to feel like what it was like to be immersed in it.
Another amazing source of light. So beautiful.
Karen, hi. I just wanted to comment. First, I was blessed because as former principal of Fierce 99, to work with Karen and Richard, and to see the children experience what they have done to enable them to reach into their imaginations and be creative. The impact was truly amazing. But my question and my thought is, children have that magical ability to be able to create and go beyond into that imagination. What happens to people that they seem to lose that as they become adults? Why are some people able, like you, Karen, you were able to hold on to that? What made you able to hold on to it? And I think Richard touched on it, and that's only my thoughts, when he said, well, those conversations you were having with your parents, they were bringing you into a world, a natural world, but it was something that they took as being, as there, and you grew with that in you. It became part of you. And I think that the love of the moon and the environment was so instilled in you and made such an impact that you need to share it, and you had that ability to do that. But it seems like most children are able to use their imagination if given the right prompts, as Richard did and you did. And my question again is, why do we lose it? You know what I mean? What happens to us?
The world happens.
I seem to lose it.
The world happens.
Where did the light go, right?
And it's true, the world happens. We spend our adult lives trying to mitigate that damage,
Yes.
especially if you're a creative person.
Yes.
You know, you're always looking for the you before the world happened,
Yes.
you know, and that's kind of the key to be able to create anything.
Yeah.
To kind of loosen that.
It's a terrible,
Fine.
terrible problem. I don't think we actually lose it. I don't think it's lost. I think it's in each of us. And I think it just takes, like Karen's exhibit as an example, it takes that moment where you are confronted with another vision other than the purely factual thing of life. You're kind of exploring something beyond the pure fact of something. and you're trying to understand the, I guess in a sense, the innocence of oneself as one comes alive again. Whether it's you're hearing a piece of music, or you're seeing a work of art, or you're hearing a poem, whatever it is, it suddenly strikes you, oh, I can feel that, or I can see it, or I can hear it as if it was yesterday. Um, and it's a phenomena in us, and I don't think it gets lost. It gets misplaced. It gets put on the side because our world tends to be not thinking in those terms. Um, and it is a problem, particularly in education, where the pressure is constantly on a kind of achievement towards thinking we have to know everything in a certain exact way. You get tested in that exact way, and that exactness, unfortunately, influences a lot of human beings, particularly children, who think the world can only be this way. But when we approach it on the level that we've been talking about, and on the level that Karen has created her work, it's suddenly, oh, I know something about that too. I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about the child. And it's an amazing phenomenon to watch that transformation of a child suddenly open up to the knowledge that it's already has, even at 3, 4, 5, whatever age you want to say, it's there. It just has to come about with the kind of embrace of a question, or the embrace of an idea, or even a silly thing that happens in the classroom. You know, suddenly there's a sound in the classroom, something dropped, somebody's pencil dropped on the floor, and then one has to improvise. You know, is that the sound of a pencil? Is that the sound of a bird walking across the room? Maybe it's the sound of the bird walking across them. And the children might say, I don't see the bird. But then we might say, think about it, that a bird maybe could have gotten into the room, and it's there. It doesn't want you to see it, but you just have to look very hard, and there it is. And suddenly that relief the children have, permission that has been given to them to think in this way, suddenly there's this torrent. Rich, I know where it is. Karen, I know it's under your foot, wherever it went, right? And suddenly the conversation opens up into this chorus of responses, where the mind takes another twist and turn of a way of thinking. Um, so it, Paula, I assure you, it's there. it, it
I,
hasn't been lost.
I've been teaching some workshops for seniors, and very often when we go around, people will say, I used to write poetry when I was a teenager. And I think that's interesting, because I think adolescents, after children, adolescents are at the most impassioned moment of their lives. They react to everything, everything comes in. And so then I tell them, well, write about being a teenager, write about this, write, and give them like certain prompts to try to go back, because that, it begins to become tangible almost, that moment, that awkwardness, or whatever it was, that torture you felt going down the hallway and somebody called you a name or made fun of your hairdo or whatever, but they're so hypersensitive at adolescence. I mean, their hormones are insane. And after that, I think it's probably menopause is the next one. It's the next moment of passion and very high moods.
I want to circle back to a couple of things that have come up in the chat. And one person posted that perhaps where light comes from is the Big Bang. Some cosmologist implies the source of all the energy in the universe, the whole spectrum. And I think there's a metaphorical parallel to growing up. We all kind of experience our own personal big bangs when we move from, say, 10 years old up to 16 years old. That short 6-year span is like a big bang for us. We explode, like you say, Maria, with hormones and the world explodes on us, and you know, it kind of overshadows the internal and interior dialogues that we had when we were children. Um, I think that's a beautiful parallel there. There's another person, Robert and Justine, mentioned that so many great artists, Renoir, Monet, Picasso, have talked about wanting to get to a place where they could see the world with the innocent eyes of a child. And so, you know, that's a very um, uh, interesting idea, if we can go back there.
I want to just pick up on that word innocent. um, I feel with children, and perhaps it's an overindulgence in my thinking on this level. I think of children as not necessarily being innocent, but being very deep listeners and very sensitive to qualities of feeling or thought or ideas. And if we allow those qualities that are often extremely sophisticated to be kept open, we don't, going back to Paulette, to your question, that we already have encouraged the child to keep those qualities alive, because it is the personal view then of oneself, how you see the world, how you feel the world. And I think that's so important now, particularly in people feeling a sense of who they are, of that sense of the marvel of their own thoughts, of their own way of looking at the world, of seeing, just on that level alone. Part of it is to help all of us, but in children in this case, realize the phenomena of seeing, the marvel of seeing, and the dexterity of seeing and listening and hearing, all these elements that we have as qualities of ourselves, and allow those to be alive, and not be, you know, only constrained by a fact, but opened up into the possibilities of it all. And I must say, and I have to just say one thing, and I don't want to take too much room up here with my thinking, but you know, I think the best of scientists are the very people we're talking about, the ones that really are alive with the sensation of the world around them, sensation with the imagination being alive, the best of scientists. They don't see it as purely a piece of fact. They see it as an exploration of the marvel of life itself, of being, and how we explore those questions. And that's what a child is doing all the time. May I have the permission of just reading two possibly short little things that relate to what we're thinking about? This is a Passamaquoddy, Native American chant. And it goes this way: for we are the stars, for we sing with our light, for we are birds made of fire, for we spread our wings over the sky. Our light is a voice. And I need to follow that with a child's poem. This is by La Porsche, who's 11 years old. We were doing a whole project at school on the Lower East Side on the knowing of trees, the knowledge that trees themselves have. And this is what he wrote. He said, my tree, it's not alone. My tree feels strong because it has branches. The branches are not heavy. They are connected to each other and the air and light. The tree is never in the dark. It always has light inside. So again, that's the marvel of the child's mind, to make that leap into not just the sensory world that's outside, but the sensory world is in here, and making that connection right away. There it is, it's all there, you know, just has to be opened up.
Absolutely.
And Karen, your show would be wonderful to have children come see it. It would.
Yeah, well,
on the floor and then looking at these marvelous works that you've done and entering into those beautiful, beautiful globes of light and asking all the questions you've asked.
well, hopefully some will be able to come by and see it. So, um, I'm sitting in the gallery, which has probably, I don't know, 14-foot ceilings. But as we've been talking, I am hearing this little sound in the background, and I realize it's getting a little stronger. It's started to rain outside. And so I'm hearing this beautiful pattering, very subtle, delicate sound on the roof.
Yes. The
So
rain and light are having a conversation.
that's right. That's right.
I have to jump in here and say, someone here made the comment that, oh, we're talking about weather.
Mhm.
But Karen, I wanted to turn the conversation back to you, and I was getting to read the chat. Hi, I'm Wen Ray, and I know Karen from her association with LIU Post, where she's had such an amazing positive impact on our MFA students there. And we are just so blessed to have her be able to work with our students and share her view of the world as an artist and also as an artist professional navigating that space. So I wanted to say thank you so much for working with our students. And also, before I turn the question to you, I do want to take this moment to say thank you to Richard and Maria and Karen. All three of you tonight it's been so nourishing. And I want to say that it is nourishing because there are so many exigencies is what I want to say going on around us. But what we're talking about tonight are some ideas and realities that last far beyond the current things we are experiencing. So thank you so much for bringing us into this place tonight. And then to turn the conversation back to you and your work, Karen, someone wrote in the chat, so I'm just picking up on that. You know, your work is so amazing, and it seemed to pick up perhaps on the process of dreams. Yet we know as artists, there's some very physical material realities, you know, so it's almost like as artists, we're straddling the world of being childlike and playful, but also we have a knowledge of our materials. So the question from chat was going to ask you, Karen, so do you know how your images are going to turn out? How do you work with the materials? Is it a surprise to you? Can you talk to us about how these images emerge for you?
Sure. Sometimes I know from the first interaction with the material what the voice of the painting is. Sometimes that happens. It happens at different phases within the production of the work. With these specific paintings, the process that I'm working with is I apply a layer of Venetian plaster first. And the Venetian plaster it's plaster-like, it's gloppy, goopy stuff. It's thick, it's not runny. And so it has to be applied. You can't really apply it with a brush. You have to trowel it on with a great big scraper. And you can tone it. So I often have toned it in the paintings here. So toning is one entry point into the conversation with the material and into the conversation with the language of form in its becoming. What does it want to become? But the troweling on is the very first voice of the painting. What do you want to be? Who are you? What do you, where are you going to take me? It's really highly uncontrollable. I never know what it's going to look like, what it's going to remind me of. It's really kind of just jumping off the cliff. Once the plaster is down, it has to dry, and then it's sealed, and then I do begin to add layers of paint. So anywhere in that proceeding, the painting can whisper, it can shout, it can say clearly, it can mutter. Any metaphorical idea you have about how language is transmitted, it can sing. These paintings have done and do. So I don't know what's going to happen with a painting. It has to announce itself. Sometimes it doesn't announce itself until very late in the process. And I think, well, I don't know what this is. It's not talking to me. I'm not talking to it. It's like, do we have a brick wall or what do we have? Um, it's kind of mysterious, this business of painting. Philip Guston talked about paint as just being stuff, matter. But that when you are working with it, it somehow isn't matter anymore. It transforms. It can go back and forth between being something that has a voice, that's alive, that speaks, that becomes something, and being this inert stuff that you scrape off your palette at the end of the day. So that's a really interesting dynamic to be with in making a painting. I don't know what else to say. Maybe there's another question somebody wants to ask.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
Hey, great to see you.
It's great to see you too, and thanks for having me today. Hi, Paulette. I had the privilege of working with Karen for a year or so at PS 99, and Paulette as my principal. And Karen and I worked. We created a Pandora's box. Do you remember that, Karen? Several years ago, and the children brainstormed ideas and actually, we shared this Pandora's box with another school in Queensland, Australia. And we did an art exchange program. Remember this, Paulette? And they sent us the ribbon of butterflies in return. And it was just a wonderful project. So on your level, in your private artistic world, how do you know when you're actually finished with the piece? Or are you ever finished with the piece?
That's a great question. I always know, absolutely, unequivocally. Probably a very pedantic way to express that is they shout at me to stop.
Okay.
But it's very, very clear when a painting is done. I guess it's very hard to put into language what that feels like or how do I know that. But at somewhere along the continuum of making a painting, as you have this dialogue with this material stuff, and the material stuff is more than material stuff, it becomes this, it becomes something. It becomes something layered with other things that are there that you put there. I don't take a lot of credit for making these things because they often kind of make themselves. A couple of years ago, I started to think about, well, I wonder if I can think sensations into the paint. If I think about what I want the painting to do, will it do that? So it's like, can I ESP my concept of the painting to the paint itself? So it just becomes that. I don't have an answer for you, I'm sorry. I think that does happen at times, that your mind, and it's not just your mind, but your kind of full physical sensory apparatus can focus itself into the material, and the material will do exactly what you are wishing it to do. I can't begin to describe how that happens. It's pretty mysterious, but I believe I've witnessed it a number of times happening in the paintings. Because I'll lay a wash down, I will have a vague sense of what I want that wash to do, and then put the wash down and step back, and it's like, oh, it did it, it's perfect. And it is perfect. So at somewhere in that continuum of making a painting, the voice of the painting begins to come out. It begins to assert itself. Sometimes at that point I'll name the painting. Sometimes the name doesn't come until later. Sometimes the name comes at the beginning of the painting. But as the painting asserts itself, it really will tell me what needs doing. It will tell me where things need adjusting. And again, it's very hard to try to describe what that is or how that happens, but it is definitely a conversation with the emerging form. The form is speaking in its language, and I am responding to it. And so when it is done, it's very, very clear when it's done. it's done. I very, very, very rarely go back into a painting after it's finished.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you.
It's interesting because I think writers have the opposite, that we keep going back in, even though the experience of that initial piece may have been one experience, but moving down the line, sometimes there's still just a little bit more or a little bit different or whatever, but you bring something else to it. But I think also what you're describing about the paint and how it sort of takes over, it goes back to the Maya Angelou piece, which is that your body, everything goes into everything. And so it goes into your body, and your body becomes almost an extension of your vehicle, which in this case is paint. And I wonder how much of that happens with people who only write, for instance, on a computer. You know, many of us have grown up, some of us, I'm telling my age, but you know, we've grown up with pencils and pens, and your entire body is involved in the actual writing of something. And so then the computer is like a step away from the body. So I don't know how it's just throwing it up in the air. See what anybody says.
Probably the equivalent of trying to make a painting on the computer. I can't imagine doing that.
Right. But some people do. Hockney does.
Yeah, I know. No, there's
He talks about that. There's a exhibit coming up. I guess it's at the Morgan or it's the Frick. Maybe.
Yeah.
And there's all these quotes from him about how that works. Which is interesting.
I wanted to jump in and bring the conversation, because Karen, as you were describing your process of working with the materials, for some reason, I was having the image of a concert pianist. And, you know, so we're all in the audience and probably in a great auditorium. The pianist is quite a bit of distance from us, but we can see them seated at this grand piano, and you can see the whole body. And you know, this pianist has played this piece so many times. It's almost like they don't even have to think the piece, they just live the piece. And they become one with the instrument because they have spent so much time in being in that act of making music with that instrument. And so there's no conscious separation between the pianist, the instrument, the composition that they're playing for us. The only thing that might be more apt perhaps is an improvisational piece. So there's not someone else's composition that the pianist is interpreting. But I was just thinking of you in your studio with your materials. You know them so well, you've worked with them so long. And as you speak to us, you're indicating as kind of a surprise to you, and you're listening to what's happening in front of you. But I almost sense that you really are more one with your materials. And so it's almost indistinguishable where the materials and the artists begin and end. And I just think it's very poetic how you were talking about your experience of working in the studio.
Thanks. I think that's really true for most artists that are working at a mature level, at a high level with their materials. Absolutely, you bond with that stuff. I think if you don't, there's a danger of struggling with them, of, you know, pushing against them. And, you know, I think materials get metaphorically bruised very easily. And so, yeah, I think that's a pretty common thing, that artists do bond with their instruments. If they're musicians, they bond completely with their body. If they're dancers, you know, they bond completely with materials when when the material is an extension of their own hand. Sculptors, for example, potters, painters. I think there's an undeniable unity there that is beautiful to be a part of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glancing at the clock here, and I have a feeling many of us would be very, very happy to just hang out in this room until about midnight or so. You know, somebody runs out and gets a bottle of wine, and we could pass that around. That'd be great. But I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and I want to. If anyone has something pressing that you feel must be asked or shared before we all say goodnight, this is your opportunity. But while you are getting ready to do that, I want to thank both Richard and Maria. Thank you so much for being so willing and gracious to come together and go on this adventurous conversation all together. And thank you, everyone, for being present, for going along with us in this conversation. And, conversations don't have to end. We can pick this thread up another time, another day, individually, et cetera, et cetera. So again, thank you, everyone. I want to thank LIU Post for hosting this. And I did remember to turn the recording back on. So it's been recorded, and I will probably figure out a way to put it up into the ethereal realms so that we can access it at a future date. So watch for some kind of indication of that. It may be in one of my newsletters, or I may post a link on my website. So,
Karen, I came here through Richard Lewis, who I've known for many years, and I consider myself very blessed to have him as a kind of mentor and magician inspiration. But I wanted to say two quick things before we leave, and that was, I feel like that children really are connected with what you were talking about, of seeing poetic language and visual language as a geography, because, and they're so mercurial that they can go between those worlds quite easily through their imagination. And it's one of the marvelous things about working with children, that you're privileged in a way to keep that connection for yourself as an adult working with them. But I wanted to thank you and Richard and Maria, because I feel like you took us all on a journey to so many different places tonight through your art and through poetry and through your beautiful storytelling, Richard, and just so many places. And it's pretty cool to be able to do that while sitting at home in front of your computer. So I wanted to thank you for that, when a lot of us are kind of stuck inside right now. But one thing I wanted to also say about adults and children is I really feel strongly that one of the things that's a reason we lose what you're talking about, Paulette, as adults, is because nobody invites us there to have the kind of conversations we're having, or to experience what we did as children, because we all have it inside, but we sort of lock it up like in a closet or something. So whatever times we can find, and I feel like your artwork does this, Karen, it's not always through art. It could just be through a little conversation. But your art invites us to sort of open that door again. And I think right now, especially, and I think Wynn, you might have mentioned this too a little, but this is a crucial time for that invitation, because things are, there's so much chaos that probably needs to happen. But, those kind of invitations are more crucial in a way than ever. And I wanted to tell one other small anecdote, and that is that one thing that I've done with children a lot is make fairy houses out of natural material. And I had some adult friends of mine who kept saying to me, "Oh, I wish we could come to your workshop." So finally, one night I said to them, it's like 5 or 6 people, I'm going to have a dinner party, and I want to invite you all to come. But this is the only time I'm going to say this probably, do not bring your children. And they didn't. And we had a dinner party, and there were all these materials laid out. And I didn't say, okay, now we're building fairy houses, now we'll eat. I just left the materials out. And I can't tell you how beautiful it was to see these 6 adults creating these fairy houses, not on demand, just when they felt like it, and then going back to talking and being adults, and then going back to being adults making fairy houses. And not one fairy house was the same, not one. So I don't know what that leads to, except to say that I hope that we can all find ways to make that invitation, you know, to ourselves, but and to people we know and to people we don't know so well, because it's there, and your work allows us to enter into that world again.
That's a beautiful story. I have a wonderful interior image of very big people making these little
What it looked like.
houses for fairies. That's perfect. And you know what they say, if you build it, they'll come.
I hear that, yeah. So I've heard.
Maybe that's a good thing for us to do this weekend. When it's raining out, we can all make little fairy houses somewhere. We don't have to tell anybody about it. Thank you. That was a beautiful way to kind of close our evening together. I feel really happy. I feel happy to have spent all this time with everyone, and I would love to stay in touch. And if you feel the same way, I send a newsletter every month, and you can receive it. Just go to my website, and you'll find a spot where you can put your name down. And I often bring up things in my newsletter similar to what we were talking about tonight. But of course, in the newsletter, there's not quite it's not the right vehicle to really go in depth in the way that we have explored the different avenues of connection tonight. But it's a little something.
The newsletters are like gifts. They come in, they don't look like anything else that comes into your mailbox, and you have to stop for a minute and look at them.
Thank you.
They really are stunning.
You should also get the newsletters from Touchstone Center, by the way, because they are pure, unmitigated, joyful expressions that I know you work very hard putting them together, Richard, but they're perfect.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Karen, for the journey you've taken us tonight. It's wonderful. Thank you all for listening and being part of the conversation. It's wonderful. We need more of this kind of thinking together. We really do.
Yeah. I think there should be a soiree down the road when we all could be safe together once again. And I think we'll have to think about that.
Yes.
So anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. The rain has arrived, and so it's something we can enjoy and just remember and savor all of the thoughts and ideas we shared. And I hope you will have an inspired weekend. And thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, good night.
Night.
Thank you. Great seeing you, Richard.
Wonderful seeing you, Paulette. Jill, where are you? I can't find you.
All my buddies who came, Sylvia,
Wonderful.
Julie.
Good night. Thank